Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we're joined by Dr. Austin Lake, a functional medicine practitioner, health educator, and founder of Holy Health. With a passion for root cause healing through biblical principles, Dr. Lake has helped thousands overcome chronic fatigue, hormone imbalances, and autoimmune conditions. He's the creator of the Holy Health program and Holy Health Collective, an online community empowering women on their wellness journey. His latest book, Holy Health, dives into the mind-body-spirit connection for true healing. Get ready for an amazing conversation on reclaiming your health naturally with Dr. Lake. Welcome to the show.
Man, yeah, thanks. That was quite the intro. I think we sent that over to you too. So I feel like a lot of pressure from my own team. So that's great.
Well, it's a great intro. You've done a lot and helped a lot of people. So we're excited to talk to you today.
Well, thanks for having me.
And I'm excited about the topics we're going to talk about today because I do have a huge women following. Most of my followers are women. And so we're women out there. You're in luck. We're going to talk about a lot of health questions that women have. So before we delve into those topics, will you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, I always like to say, this is, and I'm not a physician. I always tell people usually right off the bat because I think a lot of people are expecting if you're going to be in this health field that we're in, that you have to have an MD to be able to appropriately talk about it. And I think from my perspective, it's been the opposite. A lot of the MDs that I've spoken with in the past and worked with, nobody has all the answers, right? Neither do I. And I think having different perspectives is I think a good thing in life. And for me, what it was is my doctorate was actually in physical therapy or physiotherapy, depending where you are in the world. And so that was always my initial kickoff in this whole healthcare world. And thankfully, it gave me a decent enough understanding of just like how the body is supposed to operate. But it never gave me that like understanding of how to help people or even myself or my own family actually change things and start to heal. And so I went and did additional about 3 years of training in functional medicine after that. And that was where I kind of felt like I put all the pieces together on how I can actually help people. And what started off with just having people come into my brick and mortar practice in Greeley, Colorado, back in like 2018, 2019, we're just seeing that people weren't healing, where they weren't recovering, they weren't overcoming these what I would call pretty foundational things. And you start seeing all these women come through your door that are on thyroid medication or have these menstrual cycle issues, or they're not sleeping, they have low energy, they have brain fog. A lot of them are like complaining of infertility. And it just started raising these questions in my mind of like, well, what else is going on here? Like, why are we not seeing this problem solved? You're already on the medications, you're already on the birth control, you're already on, hormone replacement therapy. And this is as far as our conventional care can go. So what else is missing here? And that's what really started to raise the questions for me back then. And I guess the rest is history is what they would say.
Well, we're going to talk about some of those topics, and you're the perfect person to answer a lot of this. I've heard you talk about it on other podcasts, on social media, and places that you're teaching. So let's first talk about intermittent fasting for women, because there is a lot of debate around this. And in fact, just the other night, I was teaching a class with another doctor about hormones, and this topic came up. And so, do you believe there are benefits for intermittent fasting for women? And do you think there are risks?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything in life has risk and benefits. I think we can start with the risk just to start with. I think what I always tell my clients when I'm helping to educate them as well, it's really just kind of creating some level of intuitiveness for a person. For any person listening to this, I think it's every cell has its physiological needs, so we can't ignore those physiological needs, whether you're male or female. But there are a little bit more specifics when it comes to females that make it a little bit more of a trickier answer. And so the thing that I always try to teach my clients is, okay, intuitively, if you're evaluating whether or not you should fast, the things that I like to tell them to look for are like, are you sleeping? Like, have you been sleeping the night before? Have you been sleeping well this week? If you're not sleeping, your risk for everything's going to go up. Your risk for sickness, your risk for metabolic syndrome, cancer, everything else is going to increase if just the fact if you're getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night that is quality, consistent, deep sleep. If you're a light sleeper, you're waking up, go to the bathroom a lot. Maybe you wake up and you don't fall asleep, or maybe you wake up a lot throughout the night, or maybe you have a hard time falling asleep. All these are signs that your sleep cycle is not optimal. And so the first thing I ask is just like, what is your sleep like? If their answer is, well, I'm not getting good consistent sleep, it's like, okay, like instead of focusing on fasting, which sometimes fasting can help improve
Mm.
sleep, which we'll talk about, but more times than not, it's adding a physiological stressor to your body when you are not sleeping, and now you're throwing in, let's restrict, our eating. Let's focus on eating maybe at the wrong time, or going for a long period of time without eating. So there's more of like the intermittent fasting conversation of like fasting within a day, a 24-hour period, and then there's like fasting for more than a day. That can be two different conversations. So in terms of longer term fasting of not eating for more than 24 hours, let's kind of talk about that. That would be what I would say is probably a no-no for somebody, for a woman who's not feeling well, who's feeling like their thyroid is not functioning well, their hormones are out of whack, they're having difficulty with the menstrual cycle, they're having brain fog, they're having low energy, they're gaining weight without trying. All these are things that I would say, like, you have a problem going on, that you're seeing evidence of an internal problem manifesting in external symptoms. That's where I would say fasting for 24 hours or longer is probably not a good idea, because it's a physiological stressor that is going to put your body into a state of what, a pretty well known term of adaptive thermogenesis is kind of what's applying there, where your body starts to slow down your metabolism by design, because it doesn't think that it thinks you're in a state of survival, right? And so if you're not eating for 24 hours, like, okay, like something must be wrong. Maybe we should like slow things down and conserve energy and store things away as fat, because we may need it later. And so that basic principle is popping up in a lot of people's life, because we're inducing these survival mechanisms that have been programmed in us and our ancestors for a long time, because that's what got us here. Like we're really good survivors. If you are here on this earth today, like somebody in your lineage was a really good survivor. And so for women, we're inducing a lot of these mechanisms that are, promoting that natural tendency that our body has to kind of keep us alive. But when you're trying to thrive, that's a different conversation. So if you're thinking more in terms of just intermittent fasting, or you're kind of doing short-term fasting and you're doing it throughout a 24-hour sleep and wake cycle, that's going to be a little bit different of perspective. Like, that's where you can have digestive rest. That is good. You can eat for um, 8-10 hours a day, or you have like your breakfast, you have your lunch, you have your dinner. You're eating most of your calories with the sun. That's a really natural circadian rhythm that we follow, that is useful. I think that's a really normal thing that what we should probably be doing, of eating most of our calories before 2 o'clock is typically what I tell my clients. We're eating about 80% of what you're consuming for the day before two, because that's when you need most of that energy. Like, if you wake up, you have your breakfast, it's a good, nutritious breakfast. You're having sufficient fat and protein and complex carbs. I always give the example of, like, it sounds weird, but ground beef, sweet potato, and avocado. Like, if you kind of have that kind of combo of breakfast, you're going to give your body that nutrition that it needs to then serve you throughout the rest of your morning, and then you have a good leftovers maybe for lunch from the night before, and that will then be utilized and serve you for the rest of your afternoon. And then you can kind of tail or end the end of your day with, about 20% of your total calories for that last meal, and that will kind of get you through until bedtime, and then you can kind of ride out the rest of your night. But it doesn't need to be or it is maybe super complicated. It can be pretty simple, of eat a breakfast at 8 or 10, or somewhere in that time period, maybe an hour and a half after you wake up, hour to hour and a half after you wake up. Don't skip lunch, because I think lunch is probably your most important meal of the day that people are skipping, especially women. Because when you skip your lunch, you're going to be really, really hungry at the end of the day. You're going to be likely to overeat. You're going to be more likely to have digestive problems. You're going to be more likely to have this extra energy now that your body is needing to manage at the wrong time of day, that then can create some sleep disruptions. And so it's better to not skip lunch. If you're going to skip anything, skip, as crazy as it sounds, skip the last meal of the day. Like, but don't skip your first meal or your second meal. Like, eat a good quality breakfast, eat a good quality lunch, and then maybe have a lighter or smaller meal at the end of the day. Or even if you can't do it, skip that meal and then just kind of start fasting from that time on, because that's going to be better In my opinion, it serves people better than it does skipping your breakfast or skipping lunch.
Which is interesting that you're talking about it this way because on social media and for those, that intermittent fasting is trendy, it's always about skipping breakfast and lunch and then finally eating dinner, doing your 18, 20-hour fast or whatever. And so you suggest doing it the other way around.
If you don't get your sleep cycle, so I refer to sleep right off the bat. Like if you don't get your sleep regulated initially, that requires you to get your circadian rhythm regulated. So your circadian rhythm is what's going to dictate melatonin, cortisol, and insulin. And so if your circadian rhythm is balanced, where you wake up, you see the sunrise, or just the sun when you first wake up, your insulin is going to be more sensitive, meaning that it's going to take this energy you're taking in via food and it's going to manage it and utilize it more effectively. And again, it may not be a tremendous difference, but it makes sense if you think about it intuitively that we're going to need more energy up front during the day than we would at night. And so our bodies have over time created insulin to be more sensitive if our circadian rhythm is normal, to be more sensitive in the early part of the day. So we can take that energy more effectively, utilize it, and it kind of weans off a little bit kind of as you get closer to 6 o'clock at night. Again, for most daytime shift workers, because that's when you don't need as much energy. Like that's when our body's starting to kind of wind down and get prepared for sleep. But people kind of get that backwards. They skip breakfast. Sometimes they'll have like a salad or something for lunch, and then they they get to the end of the day and they gorge themselves or eating a bunch of food, and their insulin's a little bit less sensitive, and then you're not storing that energy appropriately. You're more likely to store it as fat. And then you're also more likely to disrupt your sleep if you're eating a bunch before bedtime anyway. And so the best way, in my opinion, is just to eat like we used to probably 150 years. I mean, probably even less than that, 25, 30, 40 years ago, where we'd have a good breakfast, have a good lunch. And, lunch is usually the biggest meal of the day. If you're a farmer anyway, that's what they call supper and dinner. Dinner was your lunch and supper was your last meal. That's how I grew up at least. But that was because you needed those nutrients for the middle of your day to kind of finish out the day. But we just in our society doesn't allow for that. Like we're on the go, we barely even we don't we treat our houses as hotels anyway. Like we're just kind of passing through and not really eating real meals anyway. And so I think for a lot of women listening to this, you got to first just ask yourself this question: like, am I even sitting down to eat a meal? Like if you're not, like that's the first place to start. Like just slow down, eat at a table, eat with your family, pray before a meal. It helps your nervous system regulate. It helps you to kind of like get in a position of gratitude. A lot of people are eating on the go and they're anxious. Their nervous systems aren't ready to even digest. So they don't prepare their stomachs for digestion. So they don't secrete these digestive enzymes necessary for proper digestion. And then they go into a meal, they scarf it down. They're eating maybe the wrong thing is maybe not, but either way, if you're eating it on the go, that's the first place you have to start with is just slowing down and making sure your body is ready to eat. So I think there's just a lot of things that we can kind of unfold there, but it's as you can see, it's multi-layered and it's I think our society is as a whole is really perpetuating this problem because we don't allow for natural rhythms to take place that have been there for years and years and years.
Yeah, I'd agree. Okay, with this intermittent fasting though, women do it, well, one of the reasons as a benefit supposedly to their hormones. But if we're skipping breakfast and what you talked about with the insulin and everything, it doesn't sound like it's benefiting our hormones, or does it?
No, I mean, not in the way in which I described. So, I mean, it can benefit the hormones. So, if you do start to eat in the way in which I described with your circadian rhythm, and your insulin is sensitive, you'll start to take that energy and utilize it. But the other thing that you won't do is you're not going to be creating this issue of insulin resistance, which insulin resistance is primarily predicated on an inflammatory problem, but also on eating at the wrong time and eating in the way in which I described. And so if we don't contribute to insulin resistance, we will start to have better issues or better our tissues will start to have a better response to our hormonal production. So, insulin resistance creates a lot of problems. Like it creates a lot of issues with PCOS. It creates a lot of issues with metabolic syndrome, like it is metabolic syndrome, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Like we don't want to be insulin resistant. And so if we want to have good downstream hormones or sex hormones, we have to have good upstream hormones like our cortisol, our thyroid, and our insulin. And if we don't have those hormones in check, then we start seeing testosterone or estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, which are those sex hormones, those thriving hormones, they start to become affected. So yeah, if you want to get these downstream hormones impacted, you have to start with the ones up top.
If women do intermittent fasting like the way you talked about with eating the breakfast and the lunch, skipping the dinner, things like that. Do you like it for women and the health benefits or not necessarily?
So the way when we work on our program, the way we do it is we first focus on, yeah, if you have like a 12, 14-hour fast, like that's a really good place to start. So that could be like, yeah, like a 6 o'clock to a 6 o'clock, or, or, for most people, it's going to be a 6 o'clock or like a 7 o'clock to like, a 9 a.m. the next day, or an 8 a.m. the next day. Like that's a very natural window that is like technically intermittent fasting that isn't that hard to do. So you just like cut yourself off at 7 o'clock at night, and then you eat breakfast again at maybe 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. And like that's technically fasting. Like you were fasting overnight, and you're allowing for that digestive rest to take place, and you're allowing for your body to start to heal, because a lot of healing takes place when we're not eating. Like if we're always putting our energy towards digesting and breaking down food, like that's a ton of energy. But if we allow for some digestive rest in between, it allows for cellular cleanup. It allows for more of a cellular healing to take place, and it's a very natural thing that, again, I think God has created within us to do it very, very just naturally. I don't think we had to put much effort into that. It allows us to detox a little better. But if we're constantly eating, we're constantly filling our body up to dos. Um, we're eating right before bed. We're eating as soon as we wake up. Maybe you're eating middle of the night because you're getting these hunger hormones kicking at the wrong time. It's just a lot of work, and so it's very simple just to kind of like, cut it off and then have a normal breakfast time, and that's a natural way to fast without having to really think about it.
It's crazy to me that like 7 to 9 is considered intermittent fasting because in my mind, that's just what
Just
you
eating,
should do. Like,
right?
don't eat
Yeah.
before bed and sleep through the night and then get up and eat breakfast.
Yeah, a lot of people though, like they know that, but then you ask them or you look at their journals or their entries of when they're eating food, and you'll see like they're eating right before bed, or they're having some snacks, or having some chips, or having a little bowl of ice cream, or they're having some fruit, or like anything like that. So like it sneaks in a little bit here and there. A lot of people get this like urge to have some sugar or something after a meal, because most people, again, don't manage energy very well, because metabolic syndrome really, before it creates this, like you start seeing, if it's like pre-diabetes or actual type 2 diabetes, you start seeing that people are needing glucose as an energy source, more commonly, and they don't break down fat as an energy source very well, and that's where you start seeing the buildup of fatty tissue, around your abdomen and places like that, because it's getting taken in and it's getting stored, but it's not being utilized. So, like if you don't have sources of sugar coming in as an energy source, you don't feel like you get like this like hangry feeling, or you start feeling like you just got to have a little snack, because your body's not able to get you into a state of fasting for even 12 to 14 hours, because you start feeling like a little bit low blood sugar, like you get a little hypoglycemic. And that's just a state where your body's just indicating, in my opinion, that you're not able to draw from these fatty resources to kind of make it work. You're not fat adapted, so your body is needing this short-term energy supply, like glucose, to kind of rely on. And so an ideal world is like, yeah, like if you're a healthy, typical person, fasting 14 hours is no big deal. If you can do that, then you can get to 16 hours, then you can get to 18 hours, and you kind of start playing with it a little bit more and get these longer term fasts. But for most people that are in an unhealthy metabolic state, they can't go 12, 14, 16 hours without needing a little something. And that's where you start realizing that, oh, there might be a metabolic problem here, to where they're not able to break down fat. And that's why they're storing it and they're not feeling good, and they still need to eat more. Like there's so many people that you
Interesting.
you see like that are overweight, that they have like you're like, you have plenty of energy. Like why are you hungry? Like why are you tired? Like there's plenty to draw from. But if their body is not able to draw from it effectively, because they've been conditioning it to draw from glucose primarily, we have to start transitioning them over to becoming what's known as fat adapted, to where they can start to take their fat or consume fat and use that as an energy source rather than glucose all the time. And that's when you'll start to see this fat be burned on themselves, rather than just like, not losing any weight, which is what happens to a lot of people. But that's truly like a cellular dysfunction. Like you're not able to cellularly make that shift happen, but you can make it happen over the course of about 3 weeks. But it does take some commitment and a bit of a process to follow to kind of get you that state.
Well, I was just going to ask how you do that because in order to use energy from fat, our insulin needs to be down, right? I mean, that's one of the big benefits of intermittent fasting is so that our fat will use its energy instead of the glucose, correct?
Yeah, so the way that we like to think about it is first we have to focus on getting inflammation down. So like we want to get you because we don't want to be contributing to insulin resistance from an inflammatory problem, which is what happens for a lot of people. So if you're eating foods that are contributing to inflammation, that is then contributing to insulin resistance. I don't fast. I don't need to fast. My metabolism works great. I have a hard time keeping weight on because like I burn it so fast. And so it's mostly like because I eat a very low inflammation diet, and I also have this genetic issue, like, I'm pretty blessed in that sense. But for people that are coming into our program, women that are coming into our program, we first focus on reduce inflammation and improve detoxification. So, like, we're trying to get rid of the source of the problem that would lead to more issues like insulin resistance to be more commonly an issue. So, like, once you get that under control via diet, via supplementation, then we start to focus on the latter third and fourth phase, which is more focus on metabolism and sex hormones. And that's when we can start to then play with exercise and fasting a little bit longer term and getting your body to where we're kind of focusing on the more optimization perspectives rather than just trying to get people to where they feel like they have energy, they can sleep well, they can be less inflamed, less achy, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so talking about inflammation, I want to ask you about inflammation just for a second. Um, do you think inflammation plays a big role in women's like progesterone and estrogen levels being off? Because so many women are like estrogen dominant and have way too high of estrogen. So is this contributing to this?
Yeah, without being like overly simplistic, like inflammation is involved, like plays a role in everything. Like if you're, I mean, there's short-term acute phase inflammation, which you sprain your ankle. It's really helpful and necessary to like bring more blood and kind of recirculate metabolites out of the injured area and like start to heal and repair. Like that's a very simple thing. People get that. It's very necessary. Chronic inflammation is like you have an ongoing immune system response to something you're consuming or an allergen in your environment or whatever the case is that's kind of creating this ongoing response or you have an infection that's chronic. That's a different deal, and that's what most people are caught up in within our society, within our environment, to the foods they're consuming, to the things they're breathing, water they're drinking. That's where it becomes a little bit overwhelming to a certain extent. But if you kind of look at it your own home and you kind of start to break it down and figure out okay, what foods are inflammatory? I always tell people the ones that they often miss are like and people know about dairy, like dairy can be inflammatory, even though raw dairy is helpful, has beneficial nutrients in it. Most people consume more pasteurized or low pasteurized or ultra pasteurized dairy. Not only does that not have hardly any benefits to it, but it also has the negative sides of it where you're consuming something that can congest your lymphatic system. So your lymphatic system is a part of your immune system that is trying to circulate out and filter out all this stuff that shouldn't be there. And in my experience, milk is one of those things that people are consuming, or dairy, for that matter. That if it's not good quality, you're not getting any of the benefits. You're just getting the side effects of it. And so things like dairy, obviously gluten, some grains, nightshades can be a big problem. Eggs can be a problem for people. You have to kind of work through a bit of elimination style diet to figure out what those things are for you. It's one of the things that we walk our clients through in our program just to figure out like what healthy foods are healthy for you. And that sounds silly to say that, but not everyone's the same in that category. So it's hard for me to say like you have to cut out all these things for your audience for somebody who's listening. And I talk about that in my book, but there's a bit of a process you need to follow to kind of figure out what foods are good for you. Because once you figure out the sourcing of where it's coming from, like that's obviously a big one. Like if you're eating eggs that are coming from a store, and one of my clients was a scientist at one point, and she said, like they all kind of go through a very similar in state process. Like, they all kind of go through the same vaccination process. They all kind of go through the same like processing. And so getting like an organic pasture raised from a store is not the same as getting it from a market down the street where you have friends that have their own chickens that you know exactly how they're feeding them and what they're giving them. Like there's a difference there. And so you want to make sure you kind of understand where the quality of your food is and kind of where it's coming from. And then once you kind of know if you have good quality, then the next step, in my opinion, at least, is to then get into kind of like what your immune system, if your immune system's having some issues, like what kind of symptoms are you having that could be related to what you're ingesting in terms of food. And that can be a big cause of your inflammation. But again, that's kind of I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much because it's a big thing that we could talk a long time about. And I talk about it in my book and my program, but uh, everyone's individuality is kind of at stake there. So I like to kind of just leave a little bit of gray area on that one.
Yeah, and I'll give a good example. So I did an elimination diet, and so did my sister. And when we reintroduced foods, when she reintroduced eggs, she was like doubled over on the floor. Like it was so painful and hurtful. And so I was like, oh, shoot, I wonder what's going to happen when I introduce eggs. But I was completely fine. And so for me, eggs are fine. They're not an issue. And eggs can be very nourishing to some people, full
Right.
of good vitamins, you know. And
Yeah.
so
Same with
it is a
dairy.
very
Yeah.
individual thing. And
Yeah.
so
Absolutely. Absolutely.
okay. Well, I'm going to move on and talk to you about PCOS because this is such an issue lately. I mean, I feel like just everywhere I go, someone else is dealing with PCOS. And so, is this because more and more people are dealing with insulin resistance? Is it more people dealing with inflammation? Talk to me about why you think so many are dealing with PCOS these days.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on the head. It's primarily a metabolic condition. Most women that have PCOS are experiencing it because of their probably insulin resistant. And then I think on top of that, you can also have, um, I think our society as a whole, there's just a lot coming at women because, and this is where it starts to kind of, if it feels like it's kind of like I'm saying the same thing, but it like they all kind of play into each other. For example, like we're talking about inflammation. Like what is inflammation? Like why is that bad? Like what causes inflammation? Is it food? Is it stress? Is it endocrine disrupting chemicals via your clothes? Like is it the things that you're putting on your skin in terms of fragrances, perfume, beauty products, deodorant, like all those things. Like are they all kind of just contributing to this whole condition that women are, 80% of women are having hormonal imbalances? Like there has to be a pretty big there has to be a lot of drivers that can kind of contribute to that big of a problem because it's happening to so many women. So I think the first thing they're saying is that it can manifest in different ways, like these hormonal imbalances. But in one of them, in ways that it manifests, is PCOS, and I think for that condition, or at least according to research, it's primarily because of insulin resistance. But again, what is contributing to insulin resistance is always my question, because you can have these young ladies um, that maybe aren't from an outside perspective doing all the wrong things. Like they're probably doing a lot of things well. Like maybe they're even in athletics. Maybe like they're 16 years old and like they shouldn't be having insulin resistance, but yet they are, and nobody else in their family has it, but they do. And so it's like it becomes kind of this weird thing. But I think for most women, you got to start asking yourself these questions of like, okay, like, am I eating enough protein? Am I deficient in anything? Like, am I deficient in vitamin D? Do I take a methylated B complex? Am I having enough magnesium in my diet? Like, should I take a magnesium supplement before bed? Do I need to, do I have actually good sleep? Like, am I waking up and feeling energized? Like, all these things are contributing to this issue of potentially exacerbating insulin resistance and making it so that your insulin is less responsive and less effective at managing energy. And so that starts to manifest in what we call, PCOS for a lot of these women. But there's just a lot of things kind of driving it, in my opinion. It's insulin resistance is a simple answer, but there's more to it than just that for sure.
And why is insulin resistance contributing to PCOS?
Yeah, it tells the ovaries to pump out more testosterone. And so, testosterone is trying to create red blood cells and drive oxygen. It's trying to get your body to be able to do more. I think if we get this signaling from our pancreas that like, hey, we have a bunch of this energy coming in, we need to take it and utilize it and do something with it. And if it constantly gets that signaling over and over again, especially for a younger woman, I think in time, again, the body's pretty creative. I think in time, the ovaries are like, okay, well, here's some testosterone. But the problem is, it's not even the testosterone that you would want for like building muscles. It's typically going to be more unfavorable. It's going to be more this alpha pathway that is going to be creating more of this androgenic response, which is more of these male type characteristics and male type hormones. So more facial hair and thinning of hair on your head, and maybe things that are less favorable for a female. And so it's not even like a benefit to a woman, which is ironic to me because women don't want to be more masculine typically. Like they want to be strong, but they also want to be able to make babies. And when you make more of these androgens, typically progesterone is what's taking the hit. And so progesterone will start to kind of be reduced, and then fertility goes down, and then estrogen dominance, more estrogen production can go up. And then you just have more of this gap between progesterone and estrogen to where making babies is very difficult.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. I'm so excited to announce that Just Ingredients has partnered with professional baseball player and two-time MVP Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper found Just Ingredients on his own a few years ago because he's absolutely committed to taking the best care of his body so he can perform his best. This led to a natural partnership and to the creation of a new Just Ingredients NSF certified sports line, providing the highest level of assurance and safety and integrity. NSF International, a trusted third-party organization dedicated to public health, rigorously tests each product to ensure it meets the strictest standards for athletes. The new sports line features protein powder, pre-workout, and electrolytes. The NSF Sport Protein Powder comes in 5 of our signature protein flavors, but has an increase to 25 grams of protein per serving, and it's sweetened with only monk fruit for those wanting to avoid stevia. Additionally, we now have a new sport electrolyte featuring higher sodium content, and our pre-workout you know and love has also been NSF Sport certified. Check out this new line in our collaboration with Bryce Harper at justingredients.us so you can see the power of Just Ingredients. Now back to the show. So if insulin resistance is playing a huge part of PCOS, and we've got so many people dealing with PCOS, doesn't then the blood sugar, roller coaster play a role? I mean, should everybody, including these women, really focus on balancing their blood glucose levels?
Yeah. And I think they're being, for the most part, told to do that. And that's, well, they'll get like a metformin prescription to kind of help with that. Um, and that can work short term. But again, that's still not the root of it though. Like that's still not like they don't have a metformin deficiency. Even though metformin, according to my business partner who's an MD, he loves metformin as far as like a drug is concerned. He always said this from like the French lilac. It's a naturally derived medication, and it's pretty useful, and it can help in terms of your gut microbiome. And a lot of people are pretty sensitive to it, but um, there's still not a deficiency of that. Like that's not the problem. It's more of an issue of all the things that I was saying up front of like, are you deficient in all these in any other critical vitamin, or are you deficient in protein in your diet? Like, are you consuming things in a way to where you're eating a lot of unrefined, simple carbohydrates, and you're eating a bagel for breakfast, and you're not adding any protein, or you're eating I don't even know what young kids eat anymore, but you're eating all that typical stuff that just doesn't have any nutrients to it. And then not only is it primarily like a carb, but it's also primarily probably contributing to an inflammatory response, to where that then worsens this whole problem of insulin resistance. Like it's not like carbs aren't the enemy. Like I love fruit, I love sweet potatoes, like I love these complex carbs that can be very nutritious and provide fiber and be very helpful. If you're eating things that are refined or unrefined and processed, and there's an added layer of, not only is it not providing any fiber or nutrition, but it's also adding a layer of inflammation, and then your cell is truly being affected by that inflammation, to where you can no longer bring things into the cell that are helping the cell to make energy, but now you're also having a hard time getting things out of the cell, aka detoxing. You start having a cellular inflammatory problem that is then spiraling into these other systems and affecting your insulin, and then affecting your testosterone, and affecting your hormones and all that stuff. So it really does create like this spiral out of control, but it really has to start with the types of foods they're consuming in terms of inflammation first, is what I would say, and then start focusing on the macros, and then start focusing on when you're eating it, like if you're eating it at the right times of day. And then once you've done that, then you start to see, how is my sleep impacted? Then you start to see, am I having normal bowel movements? If you're not having regular bowel movements, you're not detoxing. You're likely recirculating toxins within your fat cells. You're likely not detoxing hormones. And so you're likely having more issues with things like PCOS or endometriosis or whatever. So it is a simple problem, but um, in theory, but in practice, it gets difficult to solve, because people don't get told this stuff or reminded of this and nobody else around them is doing it. And so they're just going to do what's convenient, because if you don't have a true conviction that this is the way in which you have to solve it, in my opinion, at least, you won't do what it takes to solve the problem. You're just going to do what's most convenient. And that's where a lot of us get caught up, is that like, well, my doctor's telling me this is my only option and nobody else is telling me this except for this crazy guy online. And so all my friends around me are doing what's easy and what the doctor's saying. So I'm just going to go do with that because that seems to be the trusted source. And when it doesn't work, they're like, well, I guess nothing works for me. I guess I've done everything I can to solve the problem. I guess this is just my lot. And that's where I really just push back, because um, if you've gone down that road, that's fine. Like, I don't blame you for going down that road. Like, that's what most people do. But if you get down that road and you realize that, like, this is as far as it can take you and you want to go further than where it's taking you, then you have to start asking the question of, like, well, maybe I was lied to, or maybe this is wrong, or maybe these experts aren't truly the experts in all things, and that's okay. But maybe there's an alternative option for me to follow. And that's where you can start to go down your own journey, and preferably go down it before you get to the end of your rope. Like, most people contact me because they have no other option, and they just want they want to just they just have a tiny bit of hope left, and they're just trying to hopefully get something out of it by working with me. But more times than not, it's not because, like, the way that I present is the most appealing. It's just that if they've already figured out that there's no other option besides what I'm saying, and this is something they haven't tried yet, most people are willing to try it, and they're willing to, like, experiment with it, and to put effort into it. And when it starts working, they'll put more effort into it. Like, they'll do more of it. But if it doesn't work, that's when people do what's convenient, and that's what we have to get away from.
Well, and it's hard work, which is hard, and it takes time. That's the other thing. I know PCOS is really hard. It's a hard diagnosis, and people are trying to get pregnant and can't. And so, they go through a lot of emotional issues as well with this. But it is hard work and it takes time. Like this, it's not going to just fix itself overnight, and there's no magic pill for it. And so I think that's what gets frustrating or overwhelming, for these women.
Yeah, when you don't know how long, it does make it difficult to kind of keep striving forward. I think I always tell my clients, we have to kind of figure out, like, what is a reasonable goal to achieve within a reasonable time period. And, like, each person's different with that. If some people are like, hey, I just got to get my brain fog down because I got to take care of my kids and work my job. Like, okay, like, that usually takes about 4 to 5 weeks for a lot of my clients. Like, that's something we should shoot for as a first goal. And then, like, after that, it's like, well, I need to have more energy to accomplish X, Y, and Z. Okay, like, that's a reasonable goal. Let's start shooting for that. And then if it's like, I gotta be pregnant in 4 weeks, like, or else, it's like, that's not gonna work, you know. But when I shouldn't say that, like, I've had clients get pregnant very fast, where I was actually pretty surprised by it. But all I'm trying to say is we have to kind of figure out, like, what are the foundational pillars that have to be put back into place that would allow for something like PCOS to be healed from. And that's where we start to kind of focus on that. And so we kind of figure out what we want, and then we work backwards. But each person is just different. That it's kind of hard to know. But I think for people listening to this, you got to just kind of analyze, like, what do you need to see progress with? What's, like, the first thing you need to feel better with, and then start working towards that goal. Once that is accomplished, move on to a bigger goal. And I think if you can start to kind of bite away at this elephant, you'll start to feel that you're not failing, and that you're making progress, and that you're on the right track. And when you know that you're on the right track, like, that's really so reassuring that you're willing to kind of give it more time, to evaluate what the next step needs to be. But just knowing that you're on the right path is so important. And I think for a lot of people who have gone down the wrong path, like, you start knowing it's wrong usually pretty quick. And once you there, you just have to either have, like, in my opinion, really have to have enough humility to say, like, I was wrong, or I was steered wrong, or whatever. And it's not a blame game. It's just to say, like, this isn't right. And once you've acknowledged it's not right, then you can start to figure out, like, what is right then. But that's so important, just to know that you're putting effort in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you for that. And that is true. And it's just sometimes knowing a time frame. I'll tell you, years and years ago, when I dealt with my depression, and that's what got me on a health journey and everything, the doctor was like, "Hey, I need 1 year to work with you to, really make all these changes and lifestyle changes and diet changes. Are you willing to do a year?" And I was like, "Yes, I hit rock bottom. I will do a year." And so sometimes it is good just knowing a time frame of what it's going to take. But I do wanna ask you, because you touched upon really quickly about detoxing, and so that's a trendy topic out there on social media, as you've seen, And so I know people are gonna say, like, "What does he mean by detoxing? Does that mean to do some detox, regimen or take care of our liver that's detoxing 24/7 for us anyways?" What to you is detoxing?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is, um, the fact that you're here and you're watching this, like you're detoxing to a certain extent, right? Like, we're daily constantly detoxifying, like the the air that we're exhaling through the sweat of our skin, through our stool, like we're constantly detoxing. And so I think what I'm referring to is for people who are trying to go beyond just kind of daily detoxifying. So for most of us, like the reason that exercise and sauna and and sweating is so helpful is because that's a major area of detoxification that we can tap into every single day. Like it's such a useful thing. Dry brushing is another thing. I think it's probably lower on the totem pole than it would be all the things I just mentioned before that. But drinking sufficient water that has sufficient minerals in it, like having a complete salt, that whether it's like Redmond's or Baja Gold or something like that, that has like these other trace minerals in it that will help your body to aid in detoxification. Like those are all fundamental, essential areas of detoxification. Um, that's like one kind of like just general way of looking at it. So it's not overly complicated. Like I don't want you to hear detoxing and think like, oh my gosh, like do I even detox? Like you're detoxing, like you have to. Um, Beyond that, though, it's going to be more of tapping into these other areas of your cellular detox needs that maybe are struggling a little bit. And so this is where you can have, like parasites, or you can have heavy metals, or you can have mold, or you can have these kind of things that are a little bit more difficult to detox from that need more of a specific process, like active binders or charcoal or things that can kind of grab onto and move out. That's a little bit more of a it can be more of a guided process that probably should be done with the practitioner, but it probably can also be done pretty well if you read well and you can follow instructions. Like you can probably do it on your own too. There's millions of different detoxes out there. Um, we have of course, we have products and protocols that we like for different types of detoxifications that we run our clients through, depending on kind of what we think is most appropriate for them. But everyone, we first focus on just that they're drinking enough water, that they're having a daily bowel movement, that they're getting some kind of physical activity, that they're getting sleep at night, because those are all areas of detoxification that most people are skipping over that are foundational. Like if you're putting a bunch of aluminum filled deodorant in your armpits every day, like you're blocking an area of detoxification. Like if you're having constipation and you're not going more than once a day, like that's a major issue of poor detoxification. If you have a thyroid problem, your bowels are a little sluggish, you're probably not detoxing as well. There's just things like that that we can't skip over, and so that's kind of what I mean with detoxification.
Okay, so I hear on social media women who will be like, "Oh, I did this detox system and I just or, some regimen and felt terrible, felt so sick during it." And so a lot of times isn't that just the fat cells releasing those toxins and and it just circulating back into your system rather than you getting rid of them?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, usually, yeah. So yeah, that's why a lot of women struggle to lose weight. Honestly, is they recirculate those toxins every time they lose those fat. Like the fat cell will kind of break down, they'll release the toxins, and then it gets recirculated through the bloodstream, and then it just ends up right back in another fat cell. And so that is an issue of poor detoxification. But a lot of the what you would call like a Hertz response is what people get when they don't detox well, and it can be a variety of issues. So for most people, there's four different phases of detoxification, and what you're trying to do is take that toxin from like a lipid soluble matter or substance to a water soluble liquid soluble, so you can actually get it out. Or depending on where it's going to come out, it needs to transform into different substance. And so your body can have issues between these different phases of detoxification, to where if it doesn't do between like 0 to 1 well, and then it creates like a free radical, or it creates an issue like or can then contribute to your inflammation. If you don't break it down well enough and get it to its form to where it can be exhaled or pooped out or sweat out, like then it's going to be stuck in this middle state to where it can then circulate back to creating more of a toxic load. And that's where you can get these Hertz responses like headaches or different symptoms that wouldn't be there if you were kind of preparing somebody to detox well. And so if somebody is going through a detox and they're not maybe setting themselves up well, maybe they're not hydrated, maybe they're having constipation, all those things I said before. If they don't do those things well initially, and then they're ramping up detox, they likely will not feel good. And so I always tell my clients, like, hey, you should feel pretty good going through this. If you don't feel good, we may have missed something, because people often will have those symptoms, and those aren't always like they shouldn't always be there. You shouldn't be usually feeling dramatically worse if you're detoxing. If you are, you might be missing some component of what your what your body needs.
And so, do you like supplements like glutathione or things like that to help during detox?
Yeah, I mean, it's so glutathione, it's your body's biggest antioxidant. It's the most powerful antioxidant we have. Our bodies are always trying to make glutathione through like using B vitamins and this whole process, and where if you don't do it well, you don't make glutathione, you end up having typically high homocysteine. And so you can check on labs and check for homocysteine. If homocysteine is pretty high, you may not be making glutathione sufficiently. You may be lacking things like folate or B5, B6, B12, that would allow you to make glutathione. You can take glutathione. It just doesn't, people speculate on how well it can actually be absorbed. You can take liposomal glutathione, and that usually is a little bit better. And so I always tell people, like, you can do that. It's going to help you to handle those free radicals I was referring to if you aren't detoxifying. But there's like yeah, I would say that's a good detoxing agent, but it's mostly like that's a very essential thing for living in this earth. Like if you don't make glutathione, like you're gonna be full of free radicals and you're gonna die. Like so it's one of those things that we're already making. That isn't like you have to necessarily take it, but you do want to make sure you're taking the magnesium and these B vitamins and folate beforehand because that's going to help you to make glutathione itself. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Okay, so what about when people are looking to these detox systems? Is it important to find one with binders?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so again, it depends on what you're detoxing. But yeah, you usually want to have a binder of some kind. Like, and there are different binders depending on kind of um, what you're trying to accomplish. But in general, like activated charcoal is one that people think of that they'll take to kind of help with the binding process. And there's different times you want to take it depending on what you're trying to detox from, like mold and all that stuff. Like you can take these things. Usually, it's about 30 minutes before you're wanting to kind of um, take something else. And so we just have like a whole structure in place, and it's really for our structure, there's a lot of different products we use, and it lasts for about 4 months. And so we're kind of walking through that 4 month process. The first month is just trying to prep people to get to a state to where they can detox well. We then kind of focus on more of the gut health and parasites and kind of getting that environment prepared to detox. And people often see parasites come out in their stool. They'll see big yucky things that are coming out that shouldn't be there. And once you kind of get that done, then we kind of focus more on systemic detoxification. And that's where things like your liver and your lymphatic system, like we're kind of going after that level of detoxification. So that just kind of depends on what you're detoxing from. If you're just detoxing from heavy metals or just detoxing from mold, um, if you're using like zeolite for heavy metals, like there's all protocols for that. You can just do that. If you're just doing a parasite cleanse, you can just do that. There's just kind of comes back to like what you're trying to do and kind of what the person needs. But for us, we'd like to walk them through a pretty systematic 4 month process that's pretty involved. So it's a little bit more involved than a specific detox.
So, someone that's just listening to this show and they're wondering if they should do a detox, is it would you say the detoxes are if you know you have like a heavy metal issue or a mold issue, and that the average person should just be focusing on their daily detox of things that you talked about of drinking and exercise and sweating and things like that? I guess I should say, does everybody need to do one of these like fully intense detox things or not necessarily unless they have those specific conditions?
I mean, I don't have to. I think it comes back to if you want to feel great. I mean, and you're not feeling great currently. I would never discourage somebody from going through kind of like what we do in our program. But if you have what we usually do is like if you've done what we kind of say is more of like a foundational requirement for feeling optimal, and you go through it and you're still struggling with something, and you do like a heavy metals test or you do a mold test in your home and you figure out something else is going on, then it may require a little bit more like kind of specific detox from that particular problem. But in terms of like a to be a healthy human body, I think because of the day and age that we live in, it wouldn't be a bad idea to consider it, because most people have parasitic issues. Most people have, exposure to all these different environmental toxins that we're dealing with. I just did one on a client, and she had like every 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 toxin that you could think of, like with aflatoxin and different parasitic issues and some heavy metal issues. And so like for her, because her cellular health has been bad for so long, and she lives in this day and age that we all live in, and she wasn't controlling anything that she was bringing into her household or into her body, um, what do you know? Like these things started to really crank up. But for people who are just kind of like wanting to get the ball rolling, I would say, yeah, start with the things you're eating, start with your body movement, make sure you are sweating, make sure you are really well hydrated, make sure you have good proper mineralization in your water, make sure you're having a daily bowel movement. If you can do those things, that's a really good place to start. Like that's sufficient for most people. But if you want to go beyond and start to optimize, and you do have parasites or you do have these other issues, then it wouldn't be a bad idea to start to get that out of your body if it is there.
And detoxing can help anything from low energy to brain fog to stomach issues when eating to, I mean, just those simple, I shouldn't say simple, but,
No, they are.
like conditions that people feel on a daily basis.
hmm Yeah, I mean, so my colleague, he always says like, if we're going to be baking a cake, like if you're baking a cake, like there's certain requirements for baking a cake. Like in this cake, for example, in this example is like feeling well. If you want to feel well, like you have to have certain ingredients. Like your cells have to have certain things that they need. You have to have the right equipment. Like you have to have the right environment. So if you don't have an oven to bake a cake, like you can't bake a cake. If you don't have the ingredients to bake a cake, like it's not going to work. Like you can have wishful thinking, all these things that you want, but it's not going to happen. If you want your cells to thrive, you have to have the ingredients that they need. You have to have an environment that they can thrive in. And that's where your hormones, like people always are saying, like, my hormones are imbalanced. It's like, well, hormones are always imbalanced technically because they're always responding to your environment. If your environment, your cellular environment, is constantly toxic, and not in balance, like you're going to have this response from your cells to keep you alive. And that being alive is a good thing, but in terms of you thriving, it's not going to be focusing on that. And so we can't ignore the foundational principles of what it means to have good cellular health. And that's what I'm trying to refer to here is like we can't keep bombarding ourselves with toxins or this immune response or deficiencies and expect that we can just age gracefully. People are always saying like, I guess I'm just getting older. It's like, no, you're likely spending more time in a deficient state. And when you spend more time in a deficient state, you have more things pop up. We call those things diseases. But if you have those problems solved and you're not deficient and your cells are getting what they need and they're not always just trying to detoxify and they're lacking what they need to actually detoxify, then like if you give them what they need, they give you what you want. And like I know that's oversimplistic, but again, in my experience, I've seen that to be very true. And I think we've made this whole medicine thing and disease thing so complicated, and we've made people feel empowered, like they have no empowerment to do anything about it. And it's all about the genetics. It's all about what they can't do. It's all about just take this medication. And like, it's just not true. Like, I just have not seen that to be true. Like, if you start looking at like how the body functions and what it needs, sure, there are times where you need advanced, intervention from a specialist in a particular conventional field. And I'm very thankful that our if I get in a car accident, I'm glad I'm in the United States of America. If I need a procedure, I'm very glad that I have the best in the world. But if I want them to manage my diseases or manage my kids or tell me how to eat healthier or how to fix problems that are in terms of chronic disease management, I'm gonna be like, I don't care. Like, I'm not gonna take your word for it because you haven't been trained properly to know what to tell me, and that's just the truth. And it's not that it's against them or anything like that, or that they're uh, not intelligent. It's just that there's just a certain level of like deception that's kind of crept its way into all facets of our healthcare system that creates this sense of like I have to have a PhD or a MD or whatever to know anything about this body of mine, and it's just not true. But I think when we start to really think about like what you know to be inherently true about what it means to be human, most of us know all these things I just mentioned. Like they know, like oh, I know that, like, and I know people are listening, like, oh, I know this. I'm like, okay, If you know it, then like what's happening? Like why aren't we doing it? There's some disconnect between like us knowing it in our minds and like us believing it in our hearts to actually like act on it and do something about it. And I think when we start to really get down to it, a lot of us, like the lady I was just talking to, a new client, like she knows, like she buys a bunch of junk food when she goes to the grocery store and she brings it home, and she knows if she brings it home, she's going to consume it all. And it's like she doesn't want it to go to waste, or it's there and it's available, and she's had a hard day and she deserves it, or whatever. And so, a lot of these struggles we're having is happening in the grocery store. It's happening up front. It's happening with this little small voice in our mind is saying like it doesn't make that big of a difference. It's only a few times. Like it's not going to kill you. It's like okay, like that little small voice is what's creating you to have these habits to where you default to that more times than not, and that's your new normal that you're functioning within. And when you take that stuff out and you start to analyze, like, am I eating a whole food diet more times than not? Like, is this my norm? If you really analyze that, you'll start to find that, like, you probably eat out most of the time. You're probably eating a lot of seed oils. You're probably eating a lot of foods that are pro-inflammatory. They're not full of nutrition. They've been sitting on a truck or a shelf for who knows how long, and you're not eating real food, and so you're deficient. Like, your cells are deficient. If your cells are not deficient, you feel pretty good. Like, your body will start to function and thrive. Like, I used to feel terrible when I was in my 20s and just, like, could barely get by with anything, and, like, now that I'm in my 30s, like, I feel way better than I ever used to then because, like, my wife and I, we eat real food with our kids. Like, we slow down, we have real meal times, like, we try to just keep it pretty simple. We take I take supplements, of course, like, I do my own lab work and stuff like that, but it really doesn't need to be overly complicated. I think for a lot of us, like for certain really, really challenging problems, we do need to dive really deep on heavy metals and mold and toxicity. But more times than not, if you get your body into a state where it can detoxify well, those things start to go away too. Like your body starts having what it needs to do that. But you do need to go a little bit further sometimes and kind of get a little bit more specific protocol.
Yeah, it is simple if you think about it, like you said. I mean, cells make up our body. Healthy cells is a healthy you, and so let's just feed these cells the nutrients that they need, and it comes from the food. The food is providing those nutrients to the cells. So I agree with you. It's the simplicity like that.
Simplicity doesn't sell, I think that's the hard part is I think we want it to be something more complicated. And sometimes it is, but more time, like I've worked with like I said, a few thousand women. And I've just been so shocked every time that within the first few weeks they start feeling better and they're shocked too. Like it really couldn't have been that simple. I'm like, sometimes it is that simple to get the ball rolling. And I think we like it. We want it to be more complicated because we have something to blame it on. But more times than not, we just have to kind of own up and face the facts. That, like we just we can't always blame it on an outside source. Sometimes it is just us and we want to sabotage us because we don't love ourselves very well. Like we don't think we deserve to be healthy. And like, I think that's a big problem too.
Yeah, we could talk so long on that. And I've got a lot of stories of women starting a health journey and quickly feeling better. And so, yeah, we
Yeah.
could talk a lot about that, but I'm going to wrap up here. And so, thank you so much for being here. I know listeners have learned little tidbits or been reminded of things that they need to do. But where can my listeners find you? Are you still taking people?
Yeah, so we are. It's an applied situation. So we just kind of have an application process and it depends on my availability, my team's availability. But we are we're currently training practitioners too, so we can actually help even more people
Oh,
because
that's
we
awesome.
just want to make sure that yeah, we want to make sure that um they're qualified and that they're able to kind of execute what we feel is the right process. But we have realized that if I limit it to me or my colleague, Dr. Wright, we can only help so many people at once. And so we really want to make sure we can effectively help as many people as possible. And I love what you guys are doing and Dr. Red and like your guys' thing has just been amazing to watch. And I think there's people out there that want to help people. But there's still like a shortage. Like we need more qualified people that can help. So we are training practitioners as well. But I also have like a ebook that you can download. It probably will be a hard copy at some point, but it's on my link at my Instagram, which is just dr.austin.lake. You guys could probably even I'm not sure if you could put a link in the show notes or
Yeah,
whatever,
well,
but
yep.
yeah, that's probably a really good place to get started. Is just like trying to get a feel for what I think and kind of my process, and it's like $14, so it's a pretty easy way to get your mind wrapped around it if you want that.
And then you also provide a ton of free info on social media. So you guys go follow him on Instagram or the other platforms. like I said, you guys, you'll learn a lot from him, from following him. Great advice on there. And so
Sometimes.
thank you. Sometimes, is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you're coming from. I'm a little controversial sometimes, but that's just for
What
fun.
you are, well, okay, it's the whole Maha movement. It's becoming political is the problem.
It's
And
true.
so that's a whole nother topic we could have covered. But
We might do a part 2 sometime.
Maha should just be not political. Let's just say that really
I
quick.
know.
It's just about helping people get healthy. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you're Democrat, Republican, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Well, that's what was so great about RFK is he was literally a libertarian in the middle on this whole thing, and, like, he's still there, it's still, like, his movement, so, I mean, it's all of our movement, but, like, it shouldn't be political, but, again, that just goes to show how twisted we are as a society is making little kids' health political, like, that's ridiculous.
Right. Right.
Anyway.
That's a whole nother subject.
Yeah, for sure.
But I always end my podcast. I don't know if you know this. I always end my podcast by asking my guests what they have found to be the best ingredient in life. What would you say it is?
Ooh. Oh, I mean, yeah, I didn't know about that. I would first thing came to mind was joy. I think, joy can surpass all things that are not so great, and, the tricky thing about joy is that it's way different than happiness. It's gonna persist and outlast any kind of happy thing, that you'll ever face just because it's more of an internal state that I think only comes from God. And I think, if you don't have joy, it's, you see it. I used to work in the nursing home, and you would see, people who are not joyful, and you could just see, like, their lives, and, it was just really sad, but you could see these older people who had nothing going for them, all this pain, all this suffering, maybe even no family around them, but if they had joy, like, you'd wanna be around them, and that was kind of always so impactful to me.
That's so interesting you just brought that up because I just talked to someone recently and they were telling me joy is more of an eternal principle. You can feel sad and happy, sad one day, happy the next, and sad the next, and still have joy because of it being an eternal principle. And they were like, happiness is more of a fleeting emotion where joy is not. And so you, yeah, we're touching upon the same thing. So something for people to all ponder about that you can go through really hard things in life and difficult things, and life can be hard, but at the same time, you can find joy through it.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
Well, thank you so much for being here on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time. And like I said, you guys go give him a follow and you will learn more along on your health journey. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.